Picture this. It's a remarkably calm March evening back in 1987. A massive, modern powerhouse of British engineering, a three-deck ferry surges out of a Belgian port. Everything feels totally routine. It's quiet, but just 4 minutes later, this colossal vessel was resting on its side in the freezing waters of the North Sea.
90. That is the terrifyingly microscopic window of time we're looking at today. It didn't hit an iceberg, it didn't strike a mine, and there was absolutely no explosion. It took a mere 90 seconds for this massive, state-of-the-art ship to take on water, completely flip, and permanently seal its fate.
And the devastating result of those 90 seconds? 193 people died. These were just regular families, out on a cheap Friday evening newspaper holiday deal, tragically trapped less than a single mile from the safety of the shore. To this day, it remains Britain's absolutely worst peacetime maritime disaster since the Titanic.
Section 1. 90 Seconds to Eternity. Section 2. Flaws of the Ro-Ro Ferry. So how exactly does a modern marvel of engineering turn into a steel tomb in the blink of an eye? Well, in this explainer, we're going to reverse engineer this tragedy to find out how and why this happened. The ship was the MS Herald of Free Enterprise, a state-of-the-art roll-on, roll-off ferry. On March 6th, it was packed with 80 crew members and nearly 460 passengers. But to even get the cars loaded that day, the crew had to resort to some seriously primitive, duct tape-level workarounds. You see, the Zeebrugge port just wasn't built for a ship of this massive size. So to get the vehicles onto the upper deck, the crew actually flooded the bow ballast tanks. This artificially dipped the nose of the entire ship down 2 meters just to reach the loading ramp. It was a completely temporary and very risky fix.
And that risky fix put the ship in a state known as being trimmed by the bow. Because they had flooded those forward tanks, when the ferry finally left the dock at 18:05, its nose was sitting unusually, dangerously low in the water. So as the captain pushed the ship up to 18 knots, the bow wave didn't just harmlessly bounce off the hull like it normally would. Instead, it physically surged right over the spade.
Section 3. The Free Surface Effect.
Now, as that water surged over the spade, it meant zero resistance. Why? Because the massive bow doors of the ferry had been left wide open. Once tons of freezing seawater rushed violently onto the vast open car deck, a terrifying principle of physics immediately took over: the free surface effect. See, in a roll-on, roll-off ferry, to maximize space for all the cars, there are no vertical bulkheads. It's just one massive, flat, undivided space. So when thousands of gallons of water enter that open deck, the liquid center of mass begins to shift violently from side to side.
To put that into perspective, imagine a giant swinging pendulum inside the ship. Or better yet, picture a flat biscuit tin totally filled with water. If you tilt that tin even a fraction of an inch, all the water immediately rushes to one side, right? That's exactly what happened to the Herald. The undivided beck allowed the water to uncontrollably slosh, immediately listing the massive ship 30 degrees to port. The ship tried to naturally right itself, but the momentum of all that water was just too great. It instantly flipped completely over. Once that water started moving, the ship was literally a prisoner of physics.
Inside, the reality for the passengers was just absolute chaos. The moment the ship flipped, the power died instantly. Hundreds of people were plunged into pitch-black darkness as freezing ocean water poured in from everywhere. Survivors later recalled the sheer horror of trying to climb over rows of seats that had suddenly become sheer vertical walls, desperately holding babies up above the rising tide. Divers would eventually find victims who had been trapped in temporary air pockets that just slowly vanished. Ultimately, it wasn't even just drowning that claimed them. The freezing temperatures caused most of the 193 victims to die from rapid hypothermia within mere minutes.
Section 4. The Fatal Missing Light. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth could Captain David Lowery sail a massive vessel into the open ocean, hit 18 knots with the front doors completely wide open? Well, because he actually couldn't see the doors from the bridge. He was operating under this absurdly dangerous protocol called negative reporting. Basically, unless a crew member specifically called him to say, hey, something's wrong, he was trained to just assume everything was perfectly fine. Meanwhile, the horrifying physical reality right below him was that the massive bow doors were wide open, actively scooping the North Sea straight into the hull.
But wait, surely there was a warning system on the bridge, right? Like an alarm or a light? No. There was absolutely no indicator light on the bridge to tell the captain if the massive sea doors were open or closed. He was sailing completely blind. And what's truly shocking about this is that in the years leading up to this exact night, multiple captains had practically begged the ferry company to install a simple visual indicator. Management completely rejected them. They actually mocked the requests, asking if the bridge staff were just too lazy to walk down and check the doors themselves.
Section 5. The disease of sloppiness.
Okay, so the direct catalyst for this disaster was indeed human error. Assistant bosun Mark Stanley, the guy whose actual job it was to close those doors, had fallen asleep in his cabin and missed the call to shut them. But was a sleepy deckhand really the true villain here? The official public inquiry led by Mr. Justice Sheen looked much, much higher up the chain. He didn't just point the finger at the crew on board. He indicted the entire corporate body, famously concluding that the company was deeply infected with a disease of sloppiness, an infection that ran all the way from the wealthy board of directors straight down to the deckhands.
The corporate priorities of Townsend Thoresen were abundantly clear: profit over safety at every single turn. They consistently pressured crews to sail 15 minutes ahead of schedule, meaning deckhands had to aggressively rush through critical safety procedures. The company had literally ignored 5 previous incidents where ferries had gone to sea with their doors open. They totally normalized the extreme risk. And, as we just saw, they refused to spend a few extra pennies on a simple indicator light, leaving their captains entirely blind to danger. To the executives, safety was just an annoying expense. But to the 193 people who died, it was life itself.
Section 6. The legacy of Zeebrugge.
The sheer scale of this negligence sent absolute shockwaves across the globe. It forced the entire maritime world to finally wake up, take a hard look in the mirror, and completely rewrite safety standards from the ground up. Because of this disaster, the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, or MAIB, was officially formed in 1989 to independently investigate tragedies just like this one. And moving into the 90s, the disaster spurred the creation of the ISM Code. This was a real game changer because it established a global safety standard that legally held shore management, yes, the executives sitting in those comfortable offices, directly responsible for the safety of their ships at sea.
On a purely practical level, tough new international laws were hammered into place. Things that honestly seem super obvious to us now finally became mandatory. We're talking mandatory indicator lights for all ro-ro cargo doors so a captain is never flying blind again. Ships were forced to install extra emergency lighting, significantly improved and accessible escape routes, and mandatory CCTV monitoring of all vehicle decks. The ultimate goal was to ensure a ro-ro ferry could never, ever be sunk simply because a door was left open.
So what happened to the entities involved? Well, the MS Herald of Free Enterprise was eventually sold off and scrapped in Taiwan. And the company, Townsend Thoresen, they essentially vanished. In a rather cowardly aftermath, the corporate entity simply changed its name, launching a desperate rebrand to outrun the shame and the deadly legacy of what their negligence had actually caused.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. The maritime world undoubtedly learned a lot from the ghost of Zeebrugge. But decades later, the whole world watched the modern MS Costa Concordia meet a tragically similar fate, again due to human complacency. We can write all the new rules we want. We can install all the indicator lights and cameras in the world. But it really leaves you wondering, as long as corporate greed and human sloppiness exist, does that disease ever truly go away?